time grief we go, gotta learn to let it go.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Welcome back to Wake the F Up podcast, the space where we dare to turn towards the pain, soften them into the truth, and wake up to the parts of ourselves that loss tried to bury. Today's guest is someone who has not only reshaped the conversation around grief, she's built a community movement from it. Carla Fernandez is an author, speaker, and the co-founder of The Dinner Party, a national network of peer support circles for young adult grievers that's been featured in the New York Times, NPR, Oprah Daily, and more. Her new book, Renegade Grief, is a soul-deep call to reimagine how we mourn, how we gather, and how we carry our losses forward without abandoning ourselves in the process. But what moves me the most about Carla's work is this. She understands that grief doesn't end, it evolves. And she offers a framework for tending to it, not with fear, but with creativity, community, and courageous honesty. Carla's not just an expert in grief, she's a cultural architect, a truth teller, and a builder of belonging in a world that often asks us to keep it all together. So whether you're deep in the waves of loss or walking alongside someone who is, this conversation is an invitation to gather at the table, to look grief in the eye, and to reclaim the parts of yourself that still want to live. Carla, welcome. I'm so honored to have you here on Wake Wellness's podcast, Wake the F Up. Welcome. I know you've been on a crazy book tour and are kind of settling back into your home front today. And so we just really appreciate your time. And I was kind of hopeful that you might just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your story.
Totally. So happy to be here, Alex. Thank you for such a generous intro, and very happy to be hanging out with you for this next chunk of time. So
yeah, I think our listeners are going to benefit greatly from your story
awesome.
And everything you're doing in the world of grief. It's wonderful.
I've been loving listening to your podcast and getting to know you. So I'm Carla, and I am one of many people who at a young age lost a parent. And while there are many of us, oftentimes we don't feel like we have the spaces or places or invitation to talk about the fact that we experienced parent loss. I have found that in at least the culture that I lived in when my dad died when I was 21, there was sort of this constipation around how to talk about somebody's death after the first 40 days, which we're actually quite good at. The memorials, the casseroles, the condolence cards, there was sort of this silence that I found around my dad's death experience and this expectation to kind of like get back to life as air quotes normal. And yet found that I had lots of questions to ask and conversations I wanted to have and big reckonings I was holding, not just in relationship to the fact that my dad had died, but also what it meant for my own life and how I might move forward. So I started hosting dinner parties with other young adults who had experienced a significant loss. My dad was a big food guy, was in the wine business. My great-grandparents owned a luncheonette. The family table was really where we came together to kind of process what was happening in our lives and in the world around us. And I wanted that kind of space to talk about his absence and the fact that his presence had had such a big impact on my life. And I'd gone to therapy, loved it, big fan, but found it to be kind of a monologue. Oftentimes it would get really good, like at minute 45 and it was time to go. And I did go to some more traditional grief support groups, but oftentimes those were sort of housed inside the medical institution where we'd been spending time during my dad's cancer treatment. And I was so hungry to not be in the fluorescent lighting of a hospital basement anymore. And the dinner table really felt like the place where I actually wanted to like unbutton my top button of my pants and like pour a glass of wine and be like, what the heck just happened? And like, where do I go from here? I hosted this first dinner and it had the potential of being like a total blind date disaster, but was amazing. And this incredible moment of connection for the 6 people that gathered that night. And that first group continued to meet and sort of fast forward after many years of hard work and community organizing and led by my co-founder, Lennon Flowers. The Dinner Party is now a nonprofit that is nationwide serving 21 to 45-year-old grievers who are looking for companionship during and after times of significant loss. And there's now about 20,000 dinner partiers who've sat down to a table across the country. So the part of me that felt like I was the only person at the time who was hungry to have this kind of conversation ends up I was really wrong. And there's so many people that are craving spaces to get away from the kind of death denialism that we live within and find community and connection and companionship around our stories of loss. And the book, Renegade Grief, that just came out a couple of weeks ago, is really an exploration of all of the care practices that I've heard real people talk about being incredibly helpful for them as they've metabolized their own loss experience, despite the fact that we live in a culture that would have you think that like you should be kind of have figured it all out after that first year. So that's the opening spiel, and kind of how I arrived at this work.
It's just so well spoken, and it's interesting to me, like how you've been able to combine and encompass, I think, what it means to be a griever in the meal period. And I kind of was hopeful that I could read a little excerpt from your book. To be fair, I've actually never done this before, and I have many authors come on, but your book is so incredible, and I felt like it really opened my heart in many ways as a griever. As you're validating, I often have to. I sometimes will review my own social media, which really comes from these excerpts from the podcast, where I get a little indignant, and I'm like, it's not fair that the world presses all of these expectations on you when you're already carrying so much inside and you're just trying to navigate the world. And it's interesting. I felt like your book deeply spoke to that part of me that feels like there's a lot of unfairness in being a young griever and how the world wants you to hurry the hell up and get over it. And both as a mother who have children who've lost their father and as a widow who's lost her spouse, it's really challenging on both ends of the table. You're never going to get over, my kids are never going to get over the fact that their dad has died. Never. And they shouldn't. And so it's interesting. I think your book really speaks to how we grievers feel that kind of energy from the rest of the world, and it connects you. And I think dinner is a really special place. It's an intimate place. It's something that speaks to family and to connection with your loved ones. So I'm going to read a little bit of excerpt about that. And obviously I'm a massive foodie and a massive wine lover, and I feel like I would have been friends with your dad. So I'm going to read this, and I was hopeful maybe you could share a little bit about your father and his life and his impact on your story, because that's why we're here, right? This is how it all got started. So I'd love to hear about your dad a little bit. He sounded like a very special person. Okay, so here goes. I'm going to do some reading on her book, which is so amazing. We're going to have it linked in the show notes. And obviously, all of my people out there need to read this book. Mealtimes with him were never rushed. Conversations always glinted with threads of philosophy and science. Glasses were continually refilled. And kids were never excused from the table before the evening was over, simply because they were kids. The family dining room was our family's church, and mealtimes were my agnostic father's method of prayer. That makes my hair stand up on the back of my neck. It's so beautifully written. I totally relate to that. And I feel like mealtime is so sacred. And I love what you said about your dad not shooing you away as a child, that you were able to be seen. I think a lot of therapists can agree. That's something really special to have in a father who sees his daughter. So tell me a little bit about your dad. He sounds so wonderful.
Thank you for highlighting that passage. And yeah, it really is. It's funny because I reworked the introduction of this book 1,000 million times. And it wasn't until a later draft where I was like, actually, I'm going to start with his dinner table as kind of the original dinner table. And it seems obvious now in retrospect, but it was helpful to kind of go back to that place. My dad's name was Jose. He was a second generation. His dad was an immigrant from Spain, and he grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He was kind of this rough and tumble Brooklyn kid. And he really loved music as a young person, and really excelled in music, and ended up going to Juilliard to study orchestral conducting. And he ended up dropping out of the conductor's life because he realized he didn't want to spend his whole life working, studying in a rehearsal studio, which is where professional classical musicians end up spending a lot of their waking hours. And somehow kind of randomly ended up going into the wine business and spent the majority of his career building up wine brands around the world. And we moved from New York City from like outside of New York to California when I was young. So that's where I grew up. And it's interesting because my parents were divorced by the time I was 5 or 6. So in some ways, I think my dad's ability to host these like long, sumptuous meals was the fact that like we weren't with him on school nights. We were with our mom for sort of like Monday through Friday, and with him most, but not all weekends, because he traveled a lot for work. So there was a little bit of like a special occasion feeling of being at his house on the weekends. And I don't want to make it seem like we had like a white tablecloth meal 7 nights a week, but yeah, there were, quality over quantity. And like the time that we did get to spend with him was always thoughtful and tender. And yeah, and he was a complicated person. Like I feel like oftentimes when somebody dies, we do a lot of deification of like the man, the life, the legend, the myth, etc. And he wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he made a really strong imprint on me. And it's been interesting in this era of writing this book about him, essentially, or at least he was the beginning of it, or his death was the beginning of it. It's been interesting to, wish that he could have been my first reader, and the fact that he would be so excited that this book existed. And yet I feel like he's in the cheering section for sure, and has kind of played an editorial role, from whether it's like his memory inside of me or in some other kind of metaphysical way. But I feel like he's present in the text.
100%. And I think it's really beautiful that you speak to a couple different things that I think are crucial for grievers, which is there is an ongoing relationship with the person that has passed despite your religious beliefs of where they go in the afterlife. I do struggle myself with religiosity, and definitely have gone from being what was once a Catholic, that's just sort of handed to you, and you tend to just fall in line with the repetition there. But I'm definitely agnostic at this point and questioning at the best. And I would say that no matter what, this relationship with your person that's passed is ongoing. As you say, like in every moment, it's important that people who are listening, who may not be in the grief, but are a friend of or a witness to, might understand that it's ongoing, right? Like you're writing this book, and the first thing that you might think is the grief around the fact that your father isn't here to give you feedback or read the book in a sense that you would like him to be. And so it's really interesting how it's ongoing, that relationship, and you're constantly thinking would they think and how they impact your now, even when they're not in the presence of this realm that we can speak with them about.
Totally.
Another thing that I think is really interesting is the platform where people love to glorify and put their loved one on a pedestal after they've passed. If you have a parent, obviously, and I am one, that you're going to be filled with trials and tribulations and never be perfect. And I think that it would be cool, just like the rest of the expectations the world puts on us as grievers, is to be able to speak candidly about the people that we love and let them have their idiosyncrasies, their flaws. And everything is an and, it's not a but. He was an amazing connector, and my parents got divorced, and that was hard. I had, it's like, it's never one or the other. And I think it's weird whenever you're able to speak the truth about your loved one, certain people really can't handle that either. Mm-hmm. Have you found that in writing this book, it's gotten worse?
It's been interesting. I think a lot of the conversation that ends up happening around the dinner party table is the sort of like, yes, it's the complicated nuance. It's the flip note that like, sometimes it can be hard to talk to other relatives about.
Yes.
And, we've done a lot of work within the dinner party vernacular to make sure that we don't use the phrase loved ones, like, oh, loved one died. Because actually a lot of people come to our community and they're like, they were my father, but like, I wouldn't primarily describe them as a loved one because I never had a relationship with them in the first place, or they were my abuser, or so sort of this assumption that when we're talking about grief, we're implying that it was like a healthy, perfect relationship. And I think sometimes in the end of life retrospective, there's sort of a rush to kind of clean up or smooth over things that actually do need more like attention and healing and repair. So I think a lot of what happens within our community is a space where people can talk about the parts of their relationship that do feel unresolved, or the story that does feel more complicated than like the family story is allowing it to be. And it
is really complicated like that. I mean, the truth is, this week I'd experienced the 11th anniversary of my first husband's diagnosis day. And sometimes that diagnosis day is your father fought cancer. that's actually more traumatic sometimes than the death, because
Mhm.
the death is eventually at the end of cancer, you're almost like relieved in the death. And that sounds terrible, but it's true because of the suffrage that surrounds cancer.
Yeah.
But the diagnosis day comes as like as the PTSD or the shock to the system, where you're like, what?
Right.
Especially as a young person, I was like, wow, I really didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Like I did some EMDR and some somatic work this week with my therapist, and underneath my sadness that surfaced yet again, I'm like, here we go, 11th round. I was like, will this ever go away? Question. I'm still battling, and I had a lot of anger still residua sitting in the idea that, you know, this diagnosis has forever changed my children, and some of it being really challenging, right? Like that trust issues and, you know, anxiety issues that come with my children's grief really make life very, very challenging for them. And that's really hard to witness as a parent. And it's not fair, you know, and a lot of death is not fair. And there's a lot of anger that comes on it, and people really don't want to discuss that. So I'd love to know, like, what are the hot topics at the dinner party table with the people that we're not supposed to talk about? Because I think the listeners would love to hear some of the taboo things that come up often for you guys.
Well, first of all, how amazing that your kids have a parent who is tracking how their grief is informing their development and normalizing that with them. And I think so often, you know, many of the people that come to our community have experienced a loss recently, and many others have experienced a loss years or decades before, but are finally at a place in their life where they are seeking the support and the community around it. So there are definitely people who join the dinner party community who lost a parent or a sibling or some other significant relative when they were a child, and as an adult are kind of like now just finding that community.
Processing.
So beautiful that your kids have a parent who's like grief literate and paying attention.
I will say this, though, to the listeners out there: if you do have a parental loss with younger children, you know, one of the things I'm coming to now, 11 years later since his diagnosis, and we're going on 6 years since his death, your children will actually, and this is tough, I'm still battling this, and maybe the dinner table talks about this, you know, I'm like the dinner table having their grief talks about this, but it's that they will only process their loss when they're ready. And I continue to put them in therapy and continue to, like, they're mad at me. Like every week I make my kids go to therapy and they're mad at me, but I'm also like, at least you have the space if you need it. I think that's the thing you can do as a parent. Yeah. It's really challenging. What I realize is that both of my children actually often choose to suppress and push it down and push it down and push it down, because I think they're afraid of really head on facing it, and maybe they're not ready. And so if you're out there struggling, I'm with you. DM me, let me know how it's going. If anyone has a technique that's helping their kids get to face their grief, because it's really challenging at any age, I think.
I was spending time with this amazing leader in our field. His name's David Leonard. He's the executive director of New Hope, which is a grief support center in Long Beach, California. And he made the very obvious, once you hear someone say it, but it hadn't really occurred to me before, point of like, where do we learn how to grieve? From our parents. And if we are raised in a household where the person's name isn't mentioned after the year one of their passing, that's likely how we will also assume it's meant to be handled. So I hear, it sounds like you're modeling to your kids alternative ways and different ways to tend to their loss. And when the time is right for them, they will be they will have seen a muscle memory that is more than just a story of kind of suppression. And so I'm applauding you, Alex, and other parents who are creating another story other than what we had in our households.
Thank you. It's been definitely an emotional week in my house, and I'm never not surprised. I'm always surprised that these anniversaries can be as physically taxing as they can be, the way they make you not sleep. And you get it. You're going through it right now. I think the book tour, I guarantee, is probably driving up a lot of grief for you. And I'm like, it's crazy. It's always when you least expect it. There's these moments, and then there is the expectation, but each year it evolves a little differently, and it still surprises you because it changes, just like grief changes for us as we move through time. Well, okay. So talk to me about the dinner table. We'll skip back to the question. I forgot.
I remember the question.
I'm like, what are the hot topics that everyone's talking about? I feel like with widows, it can be will I ever love again is like a big one that it's a no talk about that I would talk about at the table. Like, when when did you decide to do this? Is there certain things you're seeing that people on repeat bring up?
So I think people expect that the dinner party conversations are all like sad, macabre, like tearful discussions. I've never laughed harder in my entire life and around the dinner party table. And the conversations aren't just about the person who died or how they died. We began with everyone inviting everybody to bring a dish that introduced their person to the rest of the table, so that we weren't just being like Jose Fernandez glioblastoma, which is how my dad died of the type of cancer he died from, but instead Jose Fernandez arroz con pollo, like Spanish cuisine, like tempranillo, Spanish wine, leading with the story of like how that person lived and like what life tasted like with them. And, feasting the dead is the oldest trick in the book that humans have to commemorate, process, recognize like they might be gone, but we are still physically here and our senses are still alive and we have to continue nourishing ourselves. So there's like the food aspect, and over time, because dinner party tables match and then meet regularly over time, the same group of people. Oftentimes, like by dinner 5, 6, or 7, you're like not bringing in a thoughtful ancestral dish, but you're like ordering pizza or whatever. But the food allows for folks to introduce their story of loss from a place that has much more to do with living than it does from death. Yeah. And then there's sort of like the conversations that people return to over and over again. There's definitely some greatest hits. I mean, every conversation is different, but there's always the like dating and grief is a big intersection. What do I do when I'm on a date and want to tell the person that my, ex or parent or sibling is no longer physically here? That's like a big category. There's the like grief and work intersection of like, actually, I want to change careers, or actually, I feel like I need time off, or actually, like everybody is so dramatic about things at work, but like it's not life or death. And I know that now. There's like oftentimes conversations about relationships with the living. Like I'm navigating dynamics with my dad's widow, or I'm navigating dynamics with my other parent or my other sibling or my grandparents, and all of the different multiplicity of dynamics that can come up that in many chances can be useful to like speak about in a therapeutic setting. But what is powerful about the dinner party table is that we're not there to give advice or solve or fix. We're really there to just normalize, to be like, oh, other people have had similar stories of tension, or have had to, other stories of different family members having completely different preferences and having to navigate different preferences. The research we have conducted with the social scientists within our community has measured like the thing that's happening that is powerful and transformative for people is this process of normalization. It's not that they're leaving being like, oh, I have 12 steps to go through to get rid of my grief. Like that's not what we're here to do. And if anybody is selling you on that, I'm like, run the other way. And there's no way to get rid of the grief. But it's really about being in a community of peers in a setting that feels human and warm, allowing your grief to exist outside of like the medical institutional establishment, and in a community that feels like it becomes over time friends, and recognizing that like there is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your grief. You are going through this incredibly human process, and like you've got to let it take the time it's going to take.
In your experience, just with the communities that you've built, and it's obvious that isolation is not a theme in any of your offerings, but what do you think happens when we witness another's grief without trying to fix it?
It's so funny because I think our instinct is like, how do we solve, fix, save, lessen the suffering of? I think when we sit in a space where we're like, okay, let me just hear you out and say back to you like, that fucking sucks, or like, oh my God, I would have been so mad, or I have no idea what that feels like because I've never lost a child, but like, what do you feel like you need now, and how can we help resource that for you? I think it drops you into this place of empathy that's about two human beings connecting about the depth of experience that creates a connection that's not about like, let me get you up out of the hole that you're in, but like, let me get down into the hole and like sit with you and see what it feels like in here and tell you that like, I'm not going anywhere. I feel like whatever the transmutation that happens in that process means that the person who's feeling it has been witnessed. They feel like the thing that they're going through is hard as hell, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be alone when they're going through it. It might not mean that like people get fully what it is they're experiencing, but like they're not going to be abandoned because it's happening to them. And I feel like it kind of allows us to throw a rope down to help someone like figure out what they need to do to take care of themselves and the people around them to figure out how to take the step forward. So yeah, that's my
It's really powerful. And I think, you know, the more that I do this, the more that I study, I'm kind of a science nerd myself. And naturally, I think through healing and find modalities to help myself. And when I say healing, I just mean like getting myself out of what you're saying, like grabbing the rope and climbing up and choosing to live again. I always felt like, at least the conversation with my young husband and myself was that he wanted me to get married again. He wanted me to live again. He wanted me to, you know, be young. And it's really challenging to choose that again for lots of reasons. And I think all grievers are wanting to choose and go away from the trauma and towards life and connection, which is what you're offering at the dinner party. But it's really interesting. The witnessing is a piece that needs to be highlighted for all the listeners, because what I'm learning about the science of the nervous system is that when we sit and work on somatic exercises, which is really just sitting inside the body, that the body is the first that captures these stories of difficulty, of grief, of love, of hope, of any of the emotions that we ride. Our body is reacting to stimuli outside of us all day long. And it's deciding on a cellular level whether we're safe to connect here or we need to protect ourselves here. And that's literally like just the oldest part of our brain working. And when it comes to love and grief and loss, you know, it's really hard to find safety to be fully vulnerable and to be seen. And often, especially if you're a caregiver, which is a lot of what loss can be for most people, there is a caregiving piece to it.
Yeah.
Even just the funeral piece, right? Like you were like, we're fine for, the 40 days of the funeral. We're held up in our to-do list and getting things done and making it about the best experience to celebrate the person we love's life. The refractory period of that is when the witnessing really needs to take place, because at that point you have to sit inside of it, right? And feel it. And it's weird, the more that I do somatic exercise with an SE, and I'm actually studying to become a somatic experiencer under Dr. Peter Levine, the biggest thing you can do for yourself is actually sit in your body sensations. And it's like the body pulls up these emotional or phraseologies. You'll be like, I'm sad, or I'm furious. And it's like this wisdom within that you need to witness. And it's weird. Like this week, I pulled up a bunch of stuff where it was like, my therapist had me screaming in my mind through the imagery of loss, right? So through the moments where I had to be on, I had to be a mom, I had to be making medical decisions, I had to be doing this. And I'm speaking, you know, it's a little more candid this week, probably because I'm rolling out of some serious grief. But isn't it interesting that like we're not able to scream or tantrum or sob or unglue because everyone's like, oh shit, is she gonna be all right?
Yeah.
And like even I feel that way. Like, am I gonna come back from the other side of this hell I'm feeling?
Yeah.
And so now 11 years later, I'm screaming in therapy, in my mind, in my body, what the day I should have screamed a long time ago. And I'm wondering, you know, when you set the table for these conversations and this witnessing, like how powerful that is to be able to just emote in the way that our body needs us to with these massive losses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we've added over time as an intro is, where are you at with your loss right now?
Yeah.
And what's cool about that is like, we all have whether we know it or not, the rehearsed story that we tell or that we're prepared to tell about like what happened and who they were and how long the cancer was, or the phraseology that's kind of like become safe for us to share. And oftentimes that's like a retroactive story. And when we start the dinners, we're like, cool. Like we already talked about that at dinner 1, but we're now on dinner 5. And like, where are you at with your loss right now? And it invites people into a place of being like, I'm actually feeling really angry. Or I'm kind of like, this week has not really been griefy at all. Or like, I got really mad at my boss. And when I think about it, like the person that I wish I could have called was them. And maybe that's why I'm having this kind of, it allows you to kind of bring your grief into the present tense. And I think there's such
mindfulness is so important, right? And that's actually how we heal grief. And another thing that I'm really working on with my own clients is like, how do we go away from the trauma vortex, right? Because the PTSD and the trauma pulls and the grief pulls you back into this abyss where you're like, all the past and all the future worries are all just sitting there. You got regret on one side and you've got worry for the future on the other. And like, if you can sit into the now of your grief, you can just say, I'm sad today because I couldn't call my father. I'm sad today, because of X, Y, and Z. And the reality is when we go to the counter vortex, hey, you know what? Like today was actually not that bad. Like I've got this blessing and this thing that's happening today. And that's not like toxic positivity. It's just really looking for the things that are keeping you feeling alive and at ease in the now, which is cool.
Do you feel like there is a world in which you could have had that primal scream 11 years ago? Like, is there a friend
do you
who could have, like,
do you think
up?
you could scream? Like, is there a space? Like, I think that like it's cool to think about the dinner party. Now, maybe I wouldn't scream at the top of my lungs. Like in my mind this week, she was like, imagine you're an animal. I mean, it was a crazy, cool like therapy. And I was a lion roaring and screaming. She's like, at first I want you to take your animalistic instincts and like whatever the lion is going to do, let it play out in your head. And of course, my my lion was really violent. The lioness was ready to tear some shit up.
Nice.
But I think that it's true to the emotions inside of me, which is it's unfair.
Yeah.
It was unfair that he lost his life. It was unfair that my kids have to carry this weight. It was unfair that he never got to be, a multi-James Beard award-winning chef because he was so young. He got sick at 30. Like, there's a lot of unfairness. It's unfair that your dad's not here. It's unfair. And we can feel that and still love our life now and still love where we are.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think we could scream that loud, but I do think you might be one of the first listeners that guests that I've ever had.
I'm listening.
And I'm like, you're probably the first guest I've had that I actually think might be creating something where you might be able to scream and have a little tantrum.
Yeah.
That's rare.
Yeah, it's one of the chapters in the book is about the power of destruction and how, like, yes, we like to have these feasts and have this beautiful ancestral meal served on a platter that was like our so-and-so's platter, and also can feel really, really good to like break shit. And we have at a lot of different dinner party events over the years hosted mini rage rooms inspired by this artist whose name is Kim Strauss, who we worked with many years ago, who had after the death of her sister, Rita, she started her sister died from suicide. She started hosting these open arts workshops for folks who were either struggling with suicidal ideation or had lost someone to suicide. And part of the kind of arts pop-up that she hosted included a room or a place where you could take plates and platters and breakable things and smash them with a hammer. And it's such a simple act, but it's so radical. And when you zoom out the lens and look at like how have human beings tended to grief in the past across space and time and cultures, oftentimes like we're lighting things on fire. Like there oftentimes like there is some act of destruction that kind of mirrors how we might feel inside or that expedites somebody's like return to the earth. And I remember going to Kim Strauss's art open studio and having my mind blown because never had I ever been invited to express my grief any way other than like the tear dripping down the cheek or the like family recipe, these kind of visuals of grief that had been introduced to me. Grief being expressed through anger or rage or destruction felt like uncomfortable and unwelcome and inappropriate and like a little too much. And so there's a whole chapter in the book that's like my attempt to give someone a unofficial RX to find a way that they can release that feeling of rage, anger, destruction, and do it in ways that is safe. One of my favorite anecdotes from that story is Lennon, my co-founder's mom, died of cancer, and a family friend came over to their house with a carton of eggs, and they took the eggs and chucked them against the fence in the backyard. And like such a simple act, but like how satisfying. I know we're in an age of high egg prices. It feels like extra taboo to
I feel like we
ruin
might
an
get
egg.
and people are getting mad, but you're like, that's how mad I am. I'm throwing my $8 egg.
That's right. So yeah, it's one of the like, and I think we live in a culture where for women, for people of color, like expressing rage has been deemed unsafe for us.
Yes.
And there's like an extra level of radicalness to create the area in your life or the room in your life where you can like let it rip. And thankfully there's now a whole VC backed industry of rage rooms across the country where you can actually go and like, it's like
they're like sold out
night.
every weekend. You're like, what's happening? Everyone has a lot of, and it's, it's probably mostly women. I actually told my husband this week about, he's always like, how'd the therapy go? And I was like, I was telling him about the screaming, and he was like, I didn't realize like you had this much anger. And he's like, you never were able to get your anger out. And I was like, comparatively to your grief, I was like, men are able to be angry. It's socially acceptable for you to be angry. For women, like we are called a bitch if we get angry. And even like the microcosm of anger that comes out for me in this show, I guarantee there's some listeners that are like, wow, she should have never said that about Carl. And I'm like, whatever, I just, at this point, I want to be, my listenership is in loyalty lies with the grievers and not the non-grievers. But I was thinking about the name and the title of the book, Renegade Grief. It's such a striking phrase. Maybe you could tell the listeners what it means to you personally. And again, like, I think you've already described it maybe in your words, how you're challenging the conventional way that our culture is, of course, telling us to grieve.
Yeah. So it wasn't originally the title for the book, but it became really clear to me as I started to look at the through line across all the stories that I was so eager to tell, the stories of Kim Strauss who are like, screw it, I'm going to create a space for people to come and break stuff after somebody dies. And being like, oh, what? Like that's kind of like creative and defying the social norm that is like grief has to look a certain way. And all of the other stories in the book are people who are like, okay, the current norms and status quo around how I'm expected to tend to my grief isn't working for me. In fact, if I defy to those norms, or if I use those norms, I won't actually grieve at all. So I'm going to have to be like a little bit of a rebel. I'm going to have to be a little bit of a renegade to actually ask myself, how does my grief want to be honored, and go about doing it? And what was cool about that framing for me of Renegade Grief is like, it helped me change the angle of the camera a little bit, such that we're looking at grief and tending to grief, not just as like a twee self-care practice or community care practice that we do in the margins of our lives and clean up so that we can like return to our default reality and be a good citizen. It's actually recognizing the fact that we live in a culture that has hardwired us to ignore, deny, suppress our grief, and that there's like power structures in place that want that to remain so, and that to actually look at the big picture of what we're tending to here is not just that, grief isn't the problem to be fixed or solved at all. Grief is this like incredible technology that our body knows how to do to help us process impermanence. The thing that needs to be fixed or solved is the social isolation that we get forced into when we are grieving. The reality that very few of us get the opportunity to have collective experiences of grief, that very few of us feel like we have the permission to honor our ancestors, even if it's like the person that just recently left. And once I started to kind of see the project through that lens and realize that there's these case studies of these renegade grievers who are defying the norms and finding their own creative, agency-filled ways of bringing people into their experience of grief, I just couldn't unsee it. And yeah, it's been such the more I'm talking about the book, the more I'm hearing stories of people who have their own kind of what I'm thinking of as a renegade grief care practice. And I'm excited that the book's out in the world now, so I can kind of just keep collecting those stories. And it's really the conversation that ends up emerging around the dinner party table. And, people don't come to the dinner party to get advice for sure, but what they end up leaving with is stories of other people who have figured out ways to navigate big days or know how to approach the days where they feel like they have rage that needs releasing or are ready to tell the story in a different way and have kind of companions in that, what I see as a creative process.
I was kind of wondering what parts of yourself you might have met while writing this book. Like, did it feel like you were writing to the you of the now to the younger you, or did you find yourself in different ways, like meeting yourself inside the book while writing? It's so powerful to write.
Oh, thanks for asking that. Yeah, I definitely was writing the book to the 21-year-old within me who went to the bookstore after her dad was diagnosed and was probably gonna die and was kind of ugh, what, how am I about to go down this particular roller coaster ride?
The train crash that's coming.
Exactly. The other versions of myself that I met around then are the hermit who's actually in the end super stoked to turn off her phone for a week and read a book and think about it and, research. And so much of the work that I've done in my life has been community organizing and working with clients and working with, helping bring together groups of people. And there's something really powerful about meeting the part of myself that is when I flip the open sign to closed and spend time kind of in my imagination. So that was really exciting to get to do. And yeah, and then there was another part of the process that was getting to kind of, I assumed when I started writing that I would have to do a whole big wave of research. But when I sat down, I realized that over the decade of work within the dinner party, I have already heard stories that I cannot unhear that are the case studies that ended up inside of the book. And it was really powerful to get to reach out to people and say remember when we were sitting across the table from each other and at that dinner in Brooklyn, and you told me about the time that you wrote a letter to your dad and put it in a Dos Equis bottle and threw it in the Hudson River. I can't stop thinking about that. Please, can we get on the phone and talk about that more? So there was a whole re-meeting that got to happen with these individuals I've connected with over the last 10 years of my journey with this work. And I've got to kind of double click on what happened for them and how time had informed their memory of those care practices too.
Well, I hope we become friends. I'm literally obsessed with you, and I think it's really cool. I like the version of you that you just spoke of, or meeting yourself where you are, which is it is so clear to me that you get the global aspect of community, and that's obviously your job in lots of realms, but for sure as a community of grievers, it seems very special and unique, and you should be extremely proud of the work you're doing. It kind of lights my entire heart on fire. This whole idea. And if it'd be okay with you, I wanted to read, and I've never also done this. I'm I'm a fangirl now.
Oh my gosh. I'm blushing. Right back at
fangirling. Because I really believe I'm shit, Carla, I needed you a long time ago and now I'm going to stalk you. And I think I want to become a dinner party host. I think David and I, we talked about it last night. I was I want to host dinner parties. If anybody's in San Antonio and you're listening and you want to come have dinner at my house, I just renovated my kitchen because cooking is my love language.
There you go.
Food is my love language. Anyway, but I'm going to read would you call this your mission statement?
I think it's the manifesto, and it was something that was community authored, led by Christina Tran, who was a community member of ours. And yeah, it kind of has been, it was early on in the organization when we were kind of planting a flag in the ground of what do we believe in that is not just to be contrarian, but that does feel different than how other people are talking about grief. I think you're going to read the manifesto, which was
I feel like you just gave me my pronoun. I am a renegade griever.
Woo-hoo!
That is who I am. And I feel like my nervous system is woo! Okay, I'm going to read this. So this is her manifesto. And I love that this was created in community. That even speaks more powerful. I cried when I read this. I printed it out. And I'm keeping it. I'm going to frame it and put it on my desk because I love it. Okay, listeners, get ready to get your tissues out, because if you are a griever, you are going to resonate with this. I am certain of it. We are dinner partiers. We know what it is to lose someone, and we're not afraid to talk about it. We hold the following truths to be self-evident. Life after loss is forever different than life before. Grief isn't linear, and moving forward is not the same as moving on. There is no roadmap, no game plan. You are your own best expert. This journey is yours alone, but you are not alone in journeying. You've got this. The commitments we make to each other are simple. We will abstain from bullshit. No whitewashing loss, no standing on platitudes, no pitying. We will speak our own truth and listen deeply, openly, thoughtfully as others share theirs. Here comes my favorite part. We believe in thriving, not just surviving. We will not avoid the pain, but we will also seek out the joy. We will see each other through our worst days and use them to create our best days. We'll take damn good care of ourselves and of each other. We will eat well, be well, live well, love well. Look around the table and pull up a chair. Cheers. It makes me almost cry just reading it. It's so beautiful.
It's cool
It's
to
like
hear you read
really
it.
very thoughtful. And I was wondering if we could end, maybe if you're okay with it, on your thoughts on legacy, and not in the traditional like egoic sense like people talk about, but at Wake, the origin of my company, Wake Wellness, was really to talk about the ripple that we leave behind energetically. And so it may have been like obviously a metaphor for Awake itself and the grieving process, but really about, I felt like after my life was shattered, I eventually got to inside of myself and thought like, who am I? Who have I always been, and who do I want to be? Because now that I hold the secret that life is so, so precious, I really care about the energy that I'm leaving behind. And most importantly for me, what I recognized was my family. For my family, that they know who I am is the most important, because those are the people I know are going to be running my funeral, and I want to speak to them at first. But I was wondering what you think about the ripple that you want to leave behind, and what do you hope people remember about the work that you're doing and what you've done?
That's such a sweet question. I think that this work for me emerged from a place of like personal need of I'm a grieving person and like I want something better. But with the deeper desire within that, it's like, I hope that when my children lose me, assuming I have children, assuming that I too will die, which chances are I probably will, that like their experience will feel different than how I felt when my dad died. I'm really interested in this legacy question that is like, how do we leave the world like even 1 or 2 degrees more aligned with our humanity and how we entered it? And I think that the work that I do in grief specifically, and the other work that I do beyond that, is really asking this question of like, how do we create spaces where people can come together and find the circles of support that they need to navigate the like unprecedented challenges that humanity is facing today. And grief is not unprecedented. Grief is like this timeless rite of passage we go through, but the culture that we're living in is very unprecedented. So I'm very curious about how can my legacy be 1 or 2 degrees of correction such that this really important, precious time in someone's life of losing someone significant is less lonely, leaves them more connected and clearer on like what it means for them to live a good life.
Well, I'm officially obsessed with you. It's not often that I have a guest that I'm like, maybe I'll just shut up because I talk too much. But I was like hanging in every word that you said today. And I'm so thrilled that you wrote a book. It's so needed. I can't tell you how many terrible grief books have been given to me. You are now my number one recommendation for gifts to grievers. I will put that on her page.
Amazing.
And I just am so grateful for this time and your wisdom and your journey and sharing your story with everyone. I think it's going to be really impactful. So maybe you want to end and let everybody know, okay, like obviously your book is out there, Renegade Grief. We're going to put everything in the show notes. Is there anything you want to just like plug away because I want the world to have as much Carla as they can have.
Yeah. Well, I'm flattered. And Alex, I'm like, if you are truly interested in becoming a host,
I am.
or if any of your listeners,
mark my words, people.
Love it.
I am a dinner partier as
Boom.
of today. I mean, didn't you feel me when I read
mean,
that? I was
just rolled off your
meant to
tongue.
be a dinner partier.
There's on our website, thedinnerparty.org, you can connect with our community team and find the virtual host trainings that happen regularly. You can join a host training and learn how to start your own table. That would allow you to write a theme and a description for your table, post it online. You can decide whether it's in person, like in Alex's gorgeous newly renovated kitchen, or on Zoom, or in a park, or wherever you feel compelled to host. A thing that we've really leaned into over the last few years are tables for specific affinities. So there are partner loss tables, there are child loss tables, there are tables specifically for LGBTQ people. There are all different types of themes that you can host a table within, up to you. And for folks that are maybe not ready to host but want to join, we have kind of an open marketplace of tables available that you can check out. We also have a buddy system. If you're like, I definitely want to have a person, but maybe I don't want to coordinate with like a group of 10 to 12. There's another kind of one-on-one offering that we provide. And then our website is just chock full of other resources. My personal website, carlafernandez.co, has a companion guide for the book that you can download for free. We've got like lots of goodies and tools and ways to connect. And we're also a nonprofit. So we're always looking for donations to our 501c3 that are tax deductible and gorgeous. So if that's in your means and you are also inspired by this work, we would definitely take your support there too.
All right, amazing. Okay,
Cool.
Listeners, call to action. You have to read this book. You have to join Dinner Party. You have to donate to this organization, which is so powerful and so needed. And I love that it's like being seen on being seen on being seen. And, there's just nothing more special than sitting in an intimate space of dinner and allowing yourself to be seen and witnessed in your grief. So thank you so much, Carla Fernandez. You will be seeing me sign up as a dinner party host. I'm ready. I'm ready to cook some dinner.
See you there.
Okay. Well, thank you, listeners. We will have everything listed that you can connect with her on show notes so that you can donate and read her book and do all the things. So I hope everyone was as excited and charged about this interview as I am. I'm thrilled. So thank you so much, Carla.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.